Why? Hello and welcome everybody. Also good morning. So if you've made it to this video, we're officially 20 hours until launch. Cannot wait for POE2. We're doing some crazy long streams. But anyway, let's go on and get into the build idea of what I'm going to be playing for launch. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with Bloodmage. Three reasons. Number one, I really enjoy unique classes in general. Bloodmage has a cool theme, right? Everything you do costs life. And also, this node right here, number 4, makes it so elemental damage also contributes to bleeding magnitude. And then the gain 10% of damage as extra physical damage. So let's talk about that slightly. Before we talk about it though, let's talk about the order of what we're doing. And then we're going to talk about the skills. Remember, there's not going to be any gameplay footage. The game's not out yet, so all we can really do is theorize right now. So starting off, we're going to be taking number 1, as there's no other choice. Number 1 gives you life remnants. I believe you can also attach support gems to life remnants. TLDR about life remnants, we're going to use a little document here. Not a document, but something I made. Life remnants make it so when you hit a boss and you crit, or when you kill mobs, you can pick up life remnants. The life remnants heal your life pool, so this right here is your life pool. This is your maximum life pool. You can also pick up life remnants to go past your life cap up to 2 times. So if you have 1k HP, you can go up to 2k over health, let's call it, right? That's how life remnants works. Now, the plan is to go 1457 or 1475, or if we end up needing life leech, we're gonna go ahead and take number 2. This is primarily defensive, with the exception of 4 being damage. You can see that on blood barbs, and number 5 being damage on getting crit damage per 40 life. Note that this is life and not maximum life, which implies it should work with the overhealth. So now let's talk about this. Here is what I want to go ahead and play. Now up here, this is gonna be a little hard to read. I'll zoom in a little bit, just like this. So these are going to be the main gems, these 6 here. And then down here are some other things we'll talk about on things you can substitute with. So my main skill of choice is going to be Frostbolt Ice Nova. For people who did not play Path of Exile 1, these are kind of combo skills that go together. TLDR, Frostbolt is a projectile that just goes outward. And then when you cast Ice Nova, instead of it casting on yourself, it will cast off of the Frostbolt. And for doing this, if you read Ice Nova, one of the last lines of text, I'll just read the bottom paragraph. Casting Ice Nova targeting it near a Frostbolt projectile will cause it to originate from the Frostbolt instead of you and cause more freeze buildup. That's what's important. So TLDR, we just cast Frostbolt, which means we can put kind of utility supports here. So we've got like faster casting to make it go faster, multiple projectiles, or volley. I'm not sure if volley is in. Just basically, you know, getting more projectiles out there. Slower projectile is optional, depends if we want more boss damage or not. Got to feel out the skill. Biting Cold can just go here as the 4 link. This is to help assist with minus res. And then Inspiration just to eventually end up reducing life and mana costs. So not really mandatory. I don't like forcing a 6 link on everything because it's going to take time to get that. So I'm also talking about order of priority. Now for Ice Nova. Ice Nova being our first initial damage dealer, right? We're going to use Ink AoE, so that's increased area of effect. We're going to go ahead and take Cold Mastery for +1. Now this doesn't come on until way later, I think. I think that's at the bottom of the supports. Cold Penetration, so it bypasses Cold Res, right? Penetrates Res. Deep Freeze and Glaciation. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Deep Freeze makes it so when you land a freeze, the freeze is longer. And this one helps you build up the freeze. Now let's talk about those two. Here's where the unique interaction comes in. We have a Flame Blast setup. Now remember how we were talking about bleeding? I've got a Flame Blast setup here that is Flame Blast. So you basically channel this. It's a circle that expands, and then you choose when to pop it, or you go for max stages. The goal is landing a freeze with the Ice Nova, right? And then as the target's frozen, we're going to build up a Flame Blast. Now, building up this Flame Blast, we have Fire Mastery, so that's +1 to Flame Blast. FrostFire, this is the unique part, where if a target is frozen, FrostFire will consume the freeze to make a very potent ignite, right? Sorry, not a potent ignite. You have to also ignite, right? So when you ignite, which we will be igniting on hit with Flame Blast, it will consume the freeze and basically apply 100% more effective ignite. So that's like a 2 times multiplier, I believe, right? More importantly, Fire Mastery increasing the level of the gem makes the gem hit harder. The ignite is going to be derived from the hit, and this is important. Hourglass to give it more damage, so that's more on the hit, but it adds a cooldown. Don't worry, we'll talk about this in a minute. Ignition to get more chance to ignite to make sure the initial hit lands the ignite, and then chance to bleed. Now, this is not the right support. If you look at POE2, POE2, the bleed support is 60%, I think, at level 1, and it applies to spells and attacks. It's not just for attacks. So this, we don't have all the correct info. Now, you might be asking, what about the extra bleed chance? What about the 100%? Realistically, I don't think that, I think you're going to be able to acquire bleed in many different sources. If we open up the passive tree right now, this is a scuffed passive tree, and we type in bleed, the only nodes you see are down here. So I'm sure there's either some bleed cluster at some point in here, because if you scroll, this is where Witch and Sork would start. There is a physical damage cluster right here. So they are providing support for physical, which makes me think bleed will be here somewhere. It's just not found yet. Alternatively, I'm sure you can get bleed on jewels, or maybe we can anoint down here. Anointing is when you can allocate one notable. So I'm sure there will be bleed supports. I don't think it will just not be a thing, considering the Bloodmage Ascendancy has bleed on one of their nodes. Okay, let's go back to what we were talking about. So the tricky thing here is there are a couple of support gems, such as Eternal Flame, right? Sorry, not Eternal Flame. I think it's Searing Flame. Essentially, if you read it, it says, supports any skill that hits enemies, causing inflicted ignites to deal more damage, but its hits deal less. Now, that's important. That's important because if I attach something like this to Flame Blast, the initial hit will go down, resulting in a weaker bleed, but a higher ignite. So what I'm trying to do here is find support gems that can scale the bleed and the ignite by just increasing the raw damage of Flame Blast. Now, this may or may not flop. This is something I really want to experiment with, but playing a cold, basically a FrostFire bleeding Bloodmage sounds so sick, right? That's just a bleeding FrostFire Bloodmage sounds amazing. Okay, so now that you got the Flame Blast links, let's talk about another one because this has a cooldown, right? So here is another instance, which is called Elemental Invocation. Now, remember how we are playing a cold build originally? So our Frostbolt and our Ice Nova are going to have the ability to freeze and chill, primarily the Ice Nova since it's got damage links. Well, as we are freezing targets, you can see Elemental Invocation will store energy. So gain 125 energy when you would freeze an enemy, up to a maximum of 500. Socketed spells consume 10 energy per 0.11 seconds of base cast time when triggered. This is important because this means that I can essentially put a very long cast time spell. This is also not correct. Firestorm on POE DB2 shows a 1.4 second cast time. I don't know what is correct and what isn't here. So TLDR, I can utilize Elemental Invocation to instantly cast a skill with a cast time, right? Because you're paying it forward in energy. By doing that, I can now use another skill that's instant to break freeze. So Biting Frost is a support gem that consumes the freeze on the enemy to guarantee a critical strike. Now, realistically, it would be more damage to put Biting Frost instead of FrostFire, but I don't think the Ignite would do very well on Firestorm because it's a multi-hit skill, right? So let's just continue with this. So now we can also support it with Fire Penetration, Critical Damage, and Elemental Focus. This is currently what I have. Now, Elemental Focus makes it so it cannot ignite, but we're not trying to ignite with this skill. The ignite would primarily come from our Flame Blast. This is important to me because I really feel like I'm trying to dip my toes into the way they want you to build your character, where you're really utilizing the different support gems to really augment your skills in a different playstyle. Now, there's two more things to talk about. Number one is how we're scaling dual element, and number two, all of these other gems here. So the last thing, I guess before we get into that, I also have a Cast on Freeze setup and a Blasphemy setup. So the Blasphemy setup is pretty generic. I think most people are going to be running something similar to this, where basically you put your curse gem of choice So in here, I'll just put temp chains because we're going to play kind of close to enemies. I've got ritualistic curse, which is basically increased AoE on your curse. The reduced delay should not matter. I believe blasphemy makes things instant. Heightened curse, which is more effect. So even if blasphemy comes with a penalty, this is still good. Then I have vitality and clarity. Vitality and clarity we're going to come back to. I suspect most builds are going to use this in general because it's providing life regen and it's providing mana regen. Vitality has a keynote that we'll talk about shortly. Next, we go into the cast on freeze. So the cast on freeze is basically the placeholder for our last area for spirit. So currently, I just quite literally have Frostbomb. The purpose of this is to just automate exposure, although I don't know if it's needed when I have, for example, biting cold here. There are some other things you can do in here, such as, I don't remember what one of them is called off the top of my head, but there's one where every time you dodge roll, you summon a clone that has a percentage of your max life. I suspect that could also be very good, but this is like the last thing that I pick up. So this is kind of like the flex area, the fluff area, right? So before we continue on, let's talk about some other gems that can be used instead of the ones here. Maybe you don't like the Frostbolt Ice Nova playstyle because it's 2-button, so there's another option. Your other option is Eye of Winter. Eye of Winter is going to be a projectile-based skill that also applies critical weakness. I don't know if that means they take more damage from crits or if they're more likely to be crit. I suspect I may have a respec from Frostbolt and Ice Nova into Eye of Winter later, but I think this will be smoother to start, so that's why I'm trying this one out. Next up is Unleash. So Unleash can very much just go, for example, in place of, I'm not really sure exactly where, maybe slower projectiles here, maybe inspiration. Unleash makes it so when you don't use a skill very often, when you click it, it basically repeats, but with a penalty, but you don't have to worry about standing still and casting it as much. So that's where Unleash comes in. Could also potentially go on Ice Nova, but I don't think so. Next up is Spell Echo. Echo allows area skills to repeat but deal less damage. However, they have more area of effect. So I think Spell Echo could go in place of, for example, increased area of effect here and or Glaciation or Deep Freeze. So this is a potential option here, right? Now we have Searing Flame, which causes inflicted ignites to deal more damage but less hit. We talked about this before. This could go in place of one of the supports on Flame Blast. Eternal Flame, which is supported skills have increased ignite duration but less chance to ignite. This would be great to replace with Ignition if we can get enough Ignite from somewhere else. Conk Effect, Concentrate Effect could go on anywhere, basically on Firestorm and or Flame Blast, because it's scaling generic area, which would make it good for Flame Blast. Next up, we have Drain Ailments, kind of a weird one. It basically, it will consume debuffs on the target, I guess ailments, who then buff another ailment. This is kind of weird because my Flame Blast will be applying Bleed and Ignite, and I don't think it can consume that much because it's already consuming Freeze from FrostFire. So the only thing I think it could consume would be Chill. So this one is a question mark, that's why it's down there. Next up is Culling Strike. Culling Strike essentially culls enemies. I was told in class in 2nd grade, never define a word with the word. So Culling Strike basically sets a threshold where it automatically kills enemies with the hit. It's nothing really too crazy, but it would go somewhere on Frostbolt. We also got Elemental Discharge, which TLDR, it will consume a freeze for our build or an ignite, and then we'll do an Elemental Discharge. What exactly that means, I'm not sure, but this could, for example, go in place of maybe FrostFire here or Biting Frost with the crit. Probably not, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Last one would be Rupture, which is aggravating bleeds if bleeds become very strong. There are also bleed supports similar to the Ignite, but I didn't list all of them. I don't think this is really worth mentioning because it's only on stunned enemies, so we kind of leave that alone. Now let's talk about, oh, and then there's also Arctic Armor. Arctic Armor could also just replace Cast on Freeze. You basically reserve some Spirit. You go ahead and anytime a melee guy taps you, right? And it actually has 7% less fire damage taken per stance and less physical damage taken per stage 2. I did not know that. Okay, we might actually use Arctic Armor. I swear that was not there 10 minutes ago. I may have just gotten updated. If so, I'm definitely replacing Cast on Freeze for this, I believe. All right, now I have two more things to talk about. Weapon swapping and health. So, as for weapon swapping, here we have a really scuffed tree. And the way POE2 weapon swapping is going to work is essentially we are going to assign our weapon skill, like our weapon here. So maybe you have a really good cold staff. So whenever you press Frostbolt or Ice Nova, you are on your cold staff. But maybe you find a really good fire staff because you have a weapon swap. You put Flame Blast and Elemental Invocation on fire. This means when you press the button, it will dynamically swap your weapon to the corresponding one attached to that skill. It's seamless. You will also get, I think, about 10 extra points designed for weapon swapping. So I plan to potentially come up here. You can clearly tell, okay, maybe you cannot tell, but this looks like cold. You can see +1 level of all cold skills. So I plan on coming somewhere around here. Right here is fire, and right here is cold. So I could very easily allocate 10 points for fire and 10 points for cold. And that is a nice seamless experience where it's just going to be basically be swapping left and right based off of the element I'm using. Now, 2 more things because I forgot one. Next, we come back to this image. So you guys remember earlier how I said this is basically your max life and this is your overhealth. This over here should be your energy shield. The reason that this is important is because there is this node here called Zealot's Oath, but it's very different in POE2. It specifically states excess life recovery from regeneration is applied to your energy shield. Now, because we are playing Bloodmage, whenever we cast, we are naturally going to use, I believe, from our overhealth, assuming we have some. This is just because of part of Bloodmage's kit. All of your skills gain a base life cost equal to mana. The plan here is to take Zealot's Oath and run Vitality. Vitality, if you see here, says regenerate 1.5% of life. Keyword life. It does not say maximum life, which makes me believe Vitality will even count the overhealth, right? The reality about how this works is Vitality and all forms of regeneration and leech, and even maybe your flasks, are not going to work for your overhealth. They're only going to work for this health bar. So the question stands, what are you doing with all of this extra sustain if you can't even use it because of this buffer? Your potions might not work, your regen doesn't work, even your life leech is most likely not going to apply to your overleech because we already saw that there is a unique that says life leech now applies to overleech. This is where Zealot's Oath comes in. So Zealot's Oath is going to take this excess life regen that's not being used and give it to your energy shield as a buffer. This means when you take damage, energy shield will protect your life pool and your overhealth, right? So mobs will chip at the energy shield and you will keep regenerating it. Obviously, it's not like you're going to be immortal or anything. It's just an extra way to make use of your regeneration because you're going to need sustain to play this class, but you don't want it to feel wasted. So this is where I think Zealot's Oath comes in. It's actually not that far of a spot. It's located here. Realistically, if you're taking the outer tree traveling, it is not too bad. There's also Bloodmage down here that a lot of people are talking about. Sorry, Blood Magic, which basically will, from what we're aware of, I believe Dreamcore made a video on this. If your skill costs 19 mana and 19 life and you take Blood Magic, it will cost 19 life. It will not cost mana anymore. This is something nice to think about. The main thing about this, though, is you have to ask yourself, do I need to worry about mana if I need to put in some int anyway because of skill gem requirements, right? That is kind of the main thing to think about there. I think that is actually it. I may or may not be missing something. The only other thing I guess I would really talk about is some other potential in Bloodmage. So if you look at Crimson Power here, Crimson Power is gain energy shield from your body armor as extra life, which then would dip into your remnants to add even more overhealth. And then that energy shield we were talking about from Crimson Power would also be a nice buffer. And then on top of that, with Zealot's Oath, the life regen will feed into the buffer. So very excited overall for the class. I'm pretty happy with it. Every single node here seems pretty good. So I'm just very excited overall. Anyway, more information obviously when we start playing, but this is pretty much what I've got. I'm going to go ahead and link this in the comments below and pin it so you guys can kind of see what's going on. But of course, if you have any questions, feel free to tune in on the live stream tomorrow. We'll be live for probably about 20 hours minimum, so cannot wait to see you guys then. As always, hope you guys had a wonderful time. Hope you guys enjoyed yourselves. If you did, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget, you can catch me streaming live every day at twitch.tv/Pohx. Take care. See you guys all tomorrow.